The champagne flute hit the marble floor like a gunshot. I watched my son's hand go slack, watched the crystal shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces at his Italian leather shoes, watched his face drain of color as he stared at the contents of the envelope I'd given him 30 seconds earlier. His wife Claire grabbed for it, her manicured nails clawing at the paper, and when she read what was inside, her mouth opened in a silent scream. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 6 hours to when this whole thing started to fall apart. The wedding was everything I wasn't. Expensive, polished, cold. I stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club looking down at my only decent suit, a 15-year-old navy blue number that had seen better days. The jacket pulled tight across my shoulders. Factory work does that to a man, builds muscle in places that don't fit into off-the-rack clothing. I was 58 years old, and every one of those years showed in the lines around my eyes, the calluses on my hands, the slight stoop in my back from 3 decades of assembly line work. My son Jason was getting married, and I hadn't been invited to a single planning meeting. The invitation had come 6 weeks earlier, formal and distant. Mr. Henry Taylor, not Dad, not even father, just my full name, printed in elegant script on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than my water bill. I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. Every penny I had left after selling my house, cashing out my pension early, liquidating everything. It was supposed to be my retirement, my safety net. Instead, it was going to be my son's wedding gift. Because that's what fathers do, right? We sacrifice. We give. We put our children first, even when those children have spent the last 5 years treating us like an embarrassment. I walked through the country club's front entrance, past floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly mortgage used to be, past ice sculptures and champagne towers and a string quartet playing something classical and forgettable. Hank! I turned to see my old friend Bobby Martinez, one of the few people from my past who'd managed to keep in touch with Jason. He looked uncomfortable in his rented tux, tugging at his collar like it was choking him. "Didn't think you'd actually come," Bobby said, pumping my hand. "Jason said you probably wouldn't make it." "He's my son." Bobby's expression softened. Yeah, he is." We stood there for a moment, 2 working-class guys surrounded by wealth we'd never understand, before Bobby cleared his throat. "Listen, Hank, I need to tell you something. Claire's family, they've been saying things about you, about how Jason deserves better than... I know what they've been saying." And I did. Small towns talk, even when you wish they wouldn't. I'd heard the whispers at the grocery store, seen the pitying looks from former neighbors. Poor Hank Taylor, they'd say. His boy made something of himself and left the old man behind. The ceremony was mercifully short. Jason stood at the altar in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car, his dark hair slicked back, his smile practiced and perfect. He looked like a stranger. When had that happened? When had my boy, the kid who used to help me fix engines in the garage, who used to laugh at my terrible jokes, who used to call me every Sunday, become this polished, distant version of himself? Claire walked down the aisle in a dress that must have cost tens of thousands. She was beautiful in that sharp, calculated way that made me uneasy. Everything about her was controlled, from her platinum blonde hair to her practiced smile, to the way she looked at my son like he was a prize she'd won. I sat in the back row and watched my son get married. Nobody saved me a seat near the front. The reception was worse than the ceremony. I found my name card at a table in the far corner, tucked behind a pillar, next to Bobby and 2 of Jason's college friends I'd never met. The head table, where Jason and Claire sat with their respective parents, was a football field away. Claire's father, Richard Sterling, was everything I wasn't. Silver-haired, successful, owner of Sterling Development, one of the largest real estate companies in the state. He stood up during dinner and gave a toast about how proud he was to welcome Jason into the family, about how his new son-in-law was exactly the kind of ambitious, driven young man he respected. He never once looked in my direction. I waited until after the main course, until people were loosened up by champagne and wine, until the speeches were done and the dancing had started. Then I made my way to the head table, the envelope heavy in my pocket. Dad. Jason's voice was flat when he saw me approaching, not warm, not excited, just acknowledgement of my existence. Jason, congratulations. I pulled out the envelope. I wanted to give you this, for you and Claire, to start your life together. Claire reached for it first, her fingers quick and greedy. She tore it open before Jason could stop her, pulled out the check, and her eyes went wide. $50,000, she breathed. Jason took the check from her, stared at it, then looked up at me. Dad, where did you get this kind of money? Sold the house, cashed out my pension. It's everything I have, but I want you to have it. You're my son. For just a moment I saw something flicker in Jason's eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. But then Claire leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened. This is really generous, Jason said, the words sounding rehearsed. But we don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's a gift. Right. Claire's laugh was sharp. A gift from a factory worker who couldn't even afford a decent suit to his own son's wedding. How touching. The table went quiet. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. Claire, Jason said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. What? I'm just being honest. She looked at me with those cold blue eyes. You worked in a factory your entire life, Henry. You live in that sad little rental apartment now because you couldn't even keep your house. And you show up here, at our wedding, trying to buy your way back into Jason's life with money you don't even have to spare. Claire, that's enough, Bobby said from behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but Claire was on a roll now, standing up, her voice carrying across the room. People were starting to stare. You know what Jason told me? He said you were never really there for him, that you were always too tired, too busy working, too focused on just getting by to actually be a father. And now you want to what? Make up for it with a check? I worked to provide for him, I said quietly, to make sure he had food and clothes and a roof over his head. You worked because that's all you knew how to do. Claire picked up the check, held it up like it was evidence in a trial. This is pathetic. You're pathetic. Jason doesn't need you anymore. He has a real family now. People who actually matter. She tore the check in half, then in half again. The pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti. The room was completely silent now. 100 people watching as my son's new wife destroyed everything I had left. I looked at Jason, waited for him to say something, waited for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd gone too far, to be the man I'd raised him to be. Instead, he picked up his champagne flute. You know what? Jason's voice was loud, confident. Claire's right. I need to be honest, Dad. I always wished for another father, someone successful, someone I could be proud of. And today, that wish came true. He turned to Richard Sterling, who was watching with a satisfied smile. Richard, you've been more of a father to me in the past year than my actual dad has been in my entire life. Thank you for showing me what it means to be a real man. Jason walked over to Richard and hugged him. The crowd applauded. I stood there, surrounded by torn pieces of paper that represented my entire life's savings, watching my son embrace another man and call him father. Bobby put his hand on my shoulder. Hank, let's go. But I couldn't move. I just stared at Jason, at the son I'd worked myself into the ground for, and realized that Claire was right about one thing. He didn't need me anymore, so I did the only thing left to do. I walked away. The walk from the country club to my apartment took 2 hours. I didn't have money for a cab, and Bobby had wanted to drive me, But I needed the time alone, needed the night air, needed to think. By the time I reached my one-bedroom rental on the east side of town, the sun was coming up, and my feet were bleeding inside my dress shoes. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my phone. One missed call from Bobby. No calls from Jason. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. The apartment was quiet in that heavy way that silence gets when you're alone and have nowhere else to be. I looked around at my life. A bed, a dresser, a small TV on a folding table, a kitchenette with dishes for one. This was what 58 years had gotten me. My phone buzzed. A text from Bobby. "You okay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop, a refurbished Dell I'd bought at a pawn shop, and did something I should have done years ago. I started digging into my son's life. It took me 3 days to find it. 3 days of searching public records, old newspaper articles, business filings, anything I could access for free online. My factory experience had taught me to be methodical, to break down complex problems into manageable steps. I applied that same logic to researching Jason. What I found made my hands shake. Sterling Development, Richard's company, was under investigation by the state attorney general. Fraud, money laundering, using shell companies to hide assets and avoid taxes. The investigation had been going on for 6 months, but nothing had been made public yet. And Jason? My son had joined Sterling Development as a junior partner 3 years ago. His name was on several of the shell company documents. I dug deeper, found email exchanges that had been part of a discovery filing, publicly available if you knew where to look. Jason and Richard discussing ways to hide money, to falsify property values, to bribe inspectors. My son wasn't just working for a corrupt company, he was actively participating in the corruption. I sat back and stared at my screen. Then I picked up my phone and called Bobby. "Hank? Jesus, man, I've been worried. Where have you been?" "Bobby, I need a favor. You still work at the county assessor's office?" "Yeah. Why?" "I need you to pull some property records for me. Everything under Sterling Development for the past 5 years. There was a long pause. "Hank, what are you doing?" "I'm being a father." The records Bobby pulled were damning. Dozens of properties purchased through shell companies, their values artificially inflated on paper, then used as collateral for loans that mysteriously disappeared. Tax evasion on a massive scale. Bribes paid to city officials to overlook zoning violations. And Jason's signature was on half of it. I made copies of everything, organized it into folders, created a timeline. The old Hank, the one who'd walked away from that wedding 6 weeks ago, would have taken this straight to the police. But I wasn't that Hank anymore. I was someone else now, someone harder, someone who understood that the system was designed to protect people like Richard Sterling and punish people like me. So I decided to handle this differently. I started with Claire's parents. Margaret Sterling was Richard's wife, but more importantly, she was the daughter of Judge Harold Pemberton, the most respected jurist in the state. I'd read about him in the papers over the years, seen his name attached to high-profile cases, watched him build a reputation for integrity. I wondered if he knew what his son-in-law was up to. I found Margaret's personal email through a church newsletter. One of those small details that people forget is publicly available. I created a new email account, something anonymous, and sent her a simple message. "Your husband is a criminal. Your daughter married my son to help hide the evidence. I have proof. We should talk." I didn't expect a response. I got one within an hour. "Who is this?" I replied. "Someone who wants the same thing you do. Justice." The response came faster this time. "Meet me tomorrow. Riverside Park, 2 p.m. Come alone." Margaret Sterling was 63 years old, rail-thin, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She sat on a park bench, wearing a coat that probably cost more than my car, looking every inch the society matriarch she was supposed to be. "Mr. Taylor, I presume?" "How did you know?" "My daughter told me about the wedding, about what happened." She gestured to the bench beside her. Sit. I sat. You said you have proof of my husband's criminal activities, Margaret said, her voice steady. Show me. I pulled out a folder containing copies of the most damaging documents. She read through them slowly, her expression never changing, though I saw her hands tighten on the papers. How long have you known? I asked. 6 months, since the investigation started. She looked up at me. I hired a private investigator, found even more than what you have here. But I've been trapped, Mr. Taylor. If I turn him in, I lose everything. The house, the money, my reputation, everything I've built. And you're okay with that? With what he's doing? Of course not. Her voice was sharp. But I'm not stupid. I've been quietly moving assets, protecting myself, waiting for the right moment. What if I told you I could give you that moment? She studied me for a long moment. What do you want? I want my son to face consequences for his choices. I want him to understand that actions matter. And I want Claire to realize that she married into a house of cards. Margaret smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Mr. Taylor, I think we can help each other. The plan took 3 months to put together. Margaret had resources I didn't. Money, connections, information. But I had something she needed. I was outside the system. Nobody was watching me. I could move freely, dig where she couldn't, talk to people who wouldn't give her the time of day. Together, we built an airtight case. I tracked down former Sterling Development employees who'd been fired for refusing to participate in the fraud. Got them to talk, to provide statements, to hand over documents they'd kept as insurance. Margaret used her father's connections to quietly alert certain journalists, certain prosecutors, certain people who could make noise when the time was right. And we discovered something else, something neither of us had expected. Claire was pregnant. I found out through Bobby, who'd heard it from a mutual friend. Jason was going to be a father. I was going to be a grandfather. For just a moment, I felt that old pull, that instinct to protect and provide. But then, I remembered the wedding, remembered my son calling another man father, remembered $50,000 torn to pieces on the floor. I kept working. The Sterling Development Annual Gala was scheduled for September 15th. Black tie, 500 guests, a celebration of another successful year. Margaret got me an invitation. I bought a new suit, this time spending money I'd saved from 3 months of working double shifts at the factory. Dark gray, properly fitted, with a black tie and shoes that didn't pinch. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who belonged. The gala was held at the same country club where Jason had gotten married. Different ballroom, same excessive wealth. I walked in with my head high, found my table, and waited. Jason and Claire arrived fashionably late. She was showing now, her dress cut to accommodate the small bump. They made their way around the room, greeting guests, accepting congratulations. When Jason saw me, he froze. Dad, what are you doing here? I was invited. Claire's eyes narrowed. By who? By me, Margaret said, appearing at my elbow. She looked at her daughter coldly. Henry and I have become quite close over the past few months, bonding over our shared disappointment in our children. Mother, what are you talking about? But Margaret had already moved past them, heading toward the stage where Richard was preparing to give his annual speech. I watched Jason's face as understanding slowly dawned. Dad, what did you do? I was a father, I said. Maybe not the father you wanted, but the father you needed. Richard Sterling took the stage, tapping the microphone. The room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate another exceptional year at Sterling Development. He never got to finish his sentence. The ballroom doors burst open, and 6 FBI agents walked in. Richard Sterling, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion. The room erupted. People shouting, cameras flashing, agents reading rights. I watched Richard's face go pale, watched him look desperately at his wife, watched Margaret turn away. Then one of the agents approached our table. "Jason Taylor, you're also under arrest." My son looked at me as they put the handcuffs on his wrists, a mix of confusion, disbelief, and raw anger clouding his eyes. His lips trembled as they clinked the cuffs shut, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the thick silence of the country club's grand ballroom. "You did this," he said, his voice barely above a hiss, the accusation hanging in the air like a bitter, stinging cloud. I stood there, my back straight, my chest tight with a complicated blend of emotions: guilt, reluctance, the kind of relief you get when you finally made the right decision, even though it feels like a betrayal. But mostly, I felt something else, something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. "I gave you every chance to be better," I said, my words as firm as I could make them, despite the gnawing pain in my chest. "You chose this path yourself." "You chose it for me." His voice cracked, the desperation more evident now, almost pleading, but still tinged with a sort of defiance. "I'm your son. How could you—" "And I loved you enough to stop you before you destroyed yourself completely," I interrupted, my voice low but unwavering. His face contorted, torn between rage and disbelief. The man who had once been my proud son, the boy I had raised with every bit of integrity I could muster, now stood there in front of me as a criminal, someone who had allowed greed, ambition, and the pursuit of power to cloud his judgment. He had chosen a life of lies, of manipulation, of blind ambition. But more than that, he had chosen to turn his back on the values I had spent decades instilling in him: family, honor, loyalty, respect. "You're not doing this," he spat. "You can't—" "You chose to lie, Marcus," I said, my voice sharp now, the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing down on me. "And you chose to hurt people. You thought the world owed you something, but it doesn't. I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've built because of your misplaced sense of entitlement." The agents began to push him forward, dragging him away, the click of their boots echoing on the polished marble floor. Marcus stumbled slightly, trying to regain his footing, but they didn't stop. He shot one last desperate glance at me, his face a twisted mess of anger, disbelief, and something else: hurt. Claire, his wife, screamed from the back of the room, a shrill, high-pitched cry of indignation that pierced the air like an animal in pain. "This isn't happening. You can't do this to him." She was struggling against two security guards, her expensive heels clicking against the floor as she fought to break free. She turned on the agents, her hands flailing. "You're making a mistake. Let him go. He's innocent. You don't understand. He's been set up. You're ruining his life." But the agents paid her no mind. They had what they needed: 3 months of carefully collected evidence. Their faces remained stoic, focused. They'd been trained for this. They had every right to be here. "Ma'am, please," one of them said, his tone flat and impersonal, like he had said these words 1,000 times before. "Step aside." She wasn't listening, of course. Claire never listened when it came to Marcus. She had always been so blinded by his potential, by the idea of what he could become, that she refused to see the cracks beneath the surface. She would fight for him now, just like she always had, but she was the one who had chosen to turn a blind eye to the truth. She had chosen the gilded life, the false promise of luxury and status over reality. I could hear her yelling still, her voice trembling with fury and fear as she struggled against the guards, but it felt distant now, faint. I had already crossed a line, made a decision that would shape everything from here on out. I turned my gaze to Margaret, standing beside me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before us. I knew she was struggling with her own version of this moment: the betrayal, the sadness, the heartbreak that always followed when someone you loved, someone you thought you knew, turned out to be someone entirely different. She didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She had seen it too: the lies, the scheming, the way Marcus had spun everything out of control. But now, watching her husband, her son, being led away in handcuffs, it hit her hard, the reality of it all. "Do you feel better?" she asked after a long, weighted silence, her voice soft, but carrying a note of something else. Not judgment, not accusation, but something I couldn't quite place. It almost felt like she was testing me, wondering if I felt a moment of vindication, if there was some relief to be found in this bitter victory. "No," I said honestly, my voice lower than usual, tinged with regret, but clear. "But I feel right." She didn't say anything for a long time. We both watched as they led Marcus out of the country club, the once proud setting now transformed into a spectacle of defeat. The whispers in the room were growing louder, the tension thick as the people around us tried to process what had just happened. For a moment, I thought about the man my son could have been, the man I thought he was becoming. But somewhere along the way, he had chosen another path, one that was paved with lies and deceit. He had chosen to break trust, to betray his family, to sell out everything he once valued for the pursuit of something hollow. And now, there was no turning back, no undoing what had been done. The sound of Claire's sobbing began to grow fainter as they moved further from us, but it still lingered, thick and painful, like an echo of everything that had gone wrong. She had seen it too, the man Marcus was becoming, the choices he had made. But now, it was too late. The veil had been lifted, and the consequences of his actions were finally being enforced. Margaret's gaze softened as she looked at me, but there was something in her eyes now, something I hadn't seen before. It was a mixture of sorrow and something else. Relief, perhaps? Understanding? I wasn't sure. I reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of this moment between us. She leaned into my touch, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's done," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "He'll have to live with it now." Margaret nodded quietly, the sound of her breath shaky. "You did what you had to do," she said. "But I can't help but wonder if we could have saved him." I took a deep breath, staring at the spot where Marcus had just disappeared from sight. Maybe. But sometimes, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. As I spoke the words, I realized how much they applied to me too. Maybe, in the end, I couldn't save Marcus from himself. Maybe he had already made his choice long before I had to make mine. It was too late for that now. The pieces had fallen where they would, and now all I could do was watch as the story played out. But at least, for once, I could hold my head up high. This, at least, was something I knew was right. The trial took 8 long months. 8 months of endless courtroom hours, the clattering sound of the gavel, the cold stares of jurors, and the whispered conversations of the spectators. Every day I sat in the back row, an observer in the theater of my son's fall from grace, my gaze never wavering from the man who had once been my pride and joy. I remember the first day of trial, how I had entered the courtroom with a sense of purpose, a grim determination to see it through to the end. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold, hard reality that would unfold over the next several weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, each revelation more damning than the last. The prosecution, with their army of forensic accountants, lawyers, and investigators, peeled back every layer of deceit that had been built up over the years. The shell companies Jason had created, designed to launder stolen funds, the falsified documents he had signed off on, thinking they would never be traced back to him. The bribes, thousands, maybe millions, passed under the table to politicians, business associates, even complete strangers, all to maintain the facade of success. All of it laid out in excruciating detail. It was a tapestry of corruption, greed, and a complete lack of moral compass. Jason sat at the defense table, his eyes dull, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look like the man I once knew. He looked like someone broken, someone who had allowed the darkness of his choices to swallow him whole. And as I watched him through the trial, I saw glimpses of the young boy I had raised, the one who had once had so much promise, the one who had called me every Sunday just to talk. But those glimpses were fleeting, and every time they surfaced, they were quickly drowned by the harsh reality of the man he had become. In the end, Jason took a plea deal. The prosecutor was willing to show him some mercy in exchange for full cooperation, and he accepted it, knowing there was no way out. 5 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation, and the full restitution of the stolen funds. I wondered briefly if he felt any remorse as he signed those papers, if the weight of the sentence bore down on him like it did on me. But Jason's sentence, his plea deal, seemed almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It didn't undo the damage he had done. Not to me, not to his mother, not to anyone who had trusted him. The months of pain, the sleepless nights, the endless arguments, the shattered dreams, it all came rushing back, one final assault on my senses. And then there was Richard, Jason's partner in crime, who was sentenced to 15 years. 15 years of his life lost, spent behind bars, the full weight of his betrayal crashing down on him. It was a just sentence, no question, but it didn't provide the satisfaction I had hoped for. There was no real justice here, not for me, not for anyone who had been hurt by what had transpired. On the day of sentencing, Jason finally looked at me. For the first time in what felt like years, our eyes met, really met, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his gaze. It was a flicker of recognition, of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, his voice too soft for anyone else to hear. I wanted to feel something in that moment, relief, anger, closure, but all I could manage was a nod. I didn't say anything, couldn't say anything. Not yet. There was no forgiveness in that nod, no absolution. There was only acknowledgement, a recognition of the truth that had been buried under lies for far too long. The court officers led him away, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the handcuffs, the metal clinking against the floor as they walked him out. Claire, sitting at the back of the courtroom, was crying, loud, desperate sobs that echoed through the room, but it didn't matter anymore. She had her own pain to deal with, her own grief, and I felt no sympathy for her. She filed for divorce while Jason was still awaiting transfer to his facility. The papers were served with a cold precision, and there was no coming back from it. She kept the baby, of course, little Rachel, who was now the only part of Jason that was still innocent, still untouched by the mess he had created. She moved back in with her mother, who had divorced Richard 2 weeks after his arrest. Margaret, as always, had protected her assets well. She and Claire would be fine, financially at least. Money wasn't the issue here, not for them. But it was for me. It had always been about something else, something deeper, something more painful. I couldn't even look at Margaret on the last day of the trial, not because I didn't care about her, because I did, but because I knew that this finality, this devastating truth, was something we were both living through in different ways. Margaret had always been the pragmatic one, the one who took a step back and made sure the business was solid. She had her distance from it, but I was in the thick of it. I had felt every inch of the betrayal, every minute of the heartbreak. Bobby came with me on the last day of court, as he had done for so many of the previous ones. He was my closest friend, the one who had stood by me through all of it. But even he could see the toll this had taken on me. "You did the right thing," Bobby said as we walked out of the courthouse, his voice low and steady, like he had rehearsed it 100 times. He had a way of cutting through the bullshit, of speaking truth when everyone else danced around it. "Did I?" I asked, my voice filled with doubt. "Did I really? Or did I just do what I thought would make me feel better?" "You stopped him before it got worse," Bobby said, pausing for a moment, as we reached the steps outside the courthouse, before the corruption destroyed him completely. That's what fathers do, Hank. We save our kids from themselves even when they hate us for it. I stopped walking for a moment, taking in what Bobby had said. The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest, even though I didn't feel lighter. Not yet. Not today. Maybe you're right, I said, glancing at Bobby. Or maybe I was just angry and hurt. Maybe I wanted him to feel a fraction of what I felt, standing in that ballroom watching him call another man father. Bobby didn't say anything to that. He just put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, understanding. It was the only thing that made sense in that moment. Either way, it's done, Bobby said quietly. You did what you had to do. And now, you can start figuring out what comes next. I looked out at the courthouse steps, at the city beyond, and for the first time in a long time, I wondered what my life would look like without this burden, without my son in my life, without all the lies, without all the pain. But as much as I wanted things to be different, as much as I wished I could turn back time and make different choices, I knew there was no going back. What was done was done. My son would have to live with the consequences of his actions, and so would I. The trial was over. Jason's fate had been sealed. But for me, the real trial was just beginning. 3 years later, I got a letter. It came to the factory, addressed to me in handwriting. I recognized immediately, even though I hadn't seen it in years. Jason's handwriting, neater now, more careful. I opened it during my lunch break, sitting in the break room with a thermos of coffee and a sandwich. Dad, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, both to you and to myself. I've had a lot of time to think in here, to really examine the choices I made and the person I became. You were right to turn me in. I see that now. I was destroying myself, and I was too arrogant and stupid to realize it. Richard Sterling isn't my father. He never was. He was a criminal who used me, and I was too blinded by ambition to see it. You're my father. The man who worked himself to exhaustion to give me opportunities. The man who taught me right from wrong, even when I chose to forget those lessons. The man who loved me enough to save me from myself. I have 2 more years in here and then 5 years of probation. When I get out, I don't expect you to welcome me back. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what you tried to teach me my whole life. Family isn't about money or status or success. It's about showing up. It's about sacrifice. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. You showed up for me, even when I pushed you away. You sacrificed everything to teach me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. And you did what was right, even though it must have killed you to do it. I'm trying to be better. I'm taking classes in here, working in the prison library, staying out of trouble. I'm trying to become someone you can be proud of again. Claire sends pictures of Emma sometimes. Our daughter, your granddaughter. She's 3 now. Beautiful, smart, has your eyes. Maybe someday, if you're willing, I'd like Emma to meet her grandfather, the real one. Not the man I tried to replace you with, but the man who worked in a factory his whole life and raised a son who forgot how to be grateful. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took prison for me to remember that. Jason. I read the letter 3 times, sitting in that break room while my coffee went cold. Then I pulled out my phone and called Bobby. I need your help, I said. I need to find out about prison visitation procedures. The Federal Correctional Facility was 2 hours north, a low-security campus surrounded by chain-link fencing. I showed my ID at the front desk, went through the metal detector, waited in a sterile visiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting. When Jason walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his expensive clothes replaced by prison khakis, his slicked-back hair now cut short and simple. But it was his eyes that had changed the most. They looked older, sadder, real. Dad. His voice broke on the word. We sat across from each other at a small table, neither of us quite knowing how to start. "Thank you for coming," Jason said finally. "I got your letter." I meant every word. I studied my son, this man who'd once been a boy helping me fix engines in the garage, who'd laughed at my terrible jokes, who'd called me every Sunday before money and ambition corrupted him. "Tell me about Emma," I said. His face lit up. "She's incredible, Dad. Smart, funny, stubborn as hell. Claire sends videos sometimes. Emma's first steps, her first words. She asks about me, about when Daddy's coming home. What do you tell her?" "Claire tells her I'm away for work. She's too young to understand." Jason's hands clenched on the table. "I'm terrified that by the time I get out, she won't even know who I am." "Then you write to her," I said. "Every week. You tell her stories about your childhood, about the good memories you have. You be a father to her even from in here, in whatever way you can. Like you were for me. I tried. You did more than try." Jason looked down at his hands. "I threw it all away. The wedding, the check, everything you sacrificed. I was so caught up in being successful, in impressing the Sterlings, that I forgot what actually mattered." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "The fraud, the corruption. You were smart enough to have a legitimate career. Why risk everything?" Jason was quiet for a long moment. "Because it was easy. Because Richard made it seem normal, like everyone at that level was doing it. And because I liked feeling important, feeling powerful, feeling like I was better than where I came from. Better than me. Yeah." He met my eyes. "I was ashamed of you, Dad, of your factory job, your modest house, your old car. I wanted to be someone different, someone who didn't have to worry about money or status or what people thought. And Claire's family offered me that. All I had to do was compromise everything you taught me." "So you did." "So I did." Jason's voice was heavy, "And it cost me everything. My freedom, my marriage, my daughter, you. Was it worth it? Not even close." I sat back in my chair, looking at this broken version of my son. "What are you going to do when you get out?" "Start over, get a real job, something honest. Be a father to Emma, if Claire will let me. Make amends." He paused. "Try to earn back your respect." "You already have it," I said quietly. His eyes widened. "What?" "You're here, doing your time, taking responsibility, trying to be better. That takes courage, more courage than I thought you had." "Dad, I'm not saying I've forgiven you completely. You hurt me, Jason, deeply. And it's going to take time for me to fully trust you again. But I see you trying, and that matters." Jason wiped at his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. No one deserves forgiveness. That's what makes it mean something." I leaned forward. "You're my son. I love you, even when I'm angry at you, even when you disappoint me, and I'll be here when you get out. Not because you deserve it, but because that's what fathers do." We talked for another hour, about everything and nothing. About Emma, about his classes, about my work at the factory. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't easy, but it was real. As I stood to leave, Jason grabbed my hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." "Never," I replied. 5 years passed faster than I expected. I visited Jason every month, watched him change, watched him grow into someone I could recognize again. We talked about life, about regrets, about second chances. He completed his GED, then started working on a college degree through the prison education program. Business administration, ironically. But this time he wanted to learn how to do things right. Emma grew from a toddler into a little girl, and Claire, to her credit, brought her to visit sometimes. My granddaughter was smart and funny and full of questions about why Grandpa Hank had such rough hands and why he smelled like machine oil. "Because I work hard," I'd tell her, and she'd nod solemnly like she understood. Margaret Sterling became an unlikely friend. She'd lost her husband but gained her independence, and she spent her time now working with advocacy groups for white-collar crime victims. We met for coffee once a month, two people who'd been hurt by the same kind of greed and learned to move forward. Bobby retired from the assessor's office and moved to Florida, but he called every week to check in. The factory where I'd worked for 3 decades closed down, automated out of existence. I took a job at a hardware store helping people fix things, offering advice on home repairs, finding satisfaction in simple work honestly done. And then, one Tuesday morning in spring, I got the call. Jason was being released. I picked him up from the facility at 8 in the morning, standing in the parking lot with my old car and a bag of fresh clothes Bobby's wife had helped me pick out. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a button-down shirt and sneakers. Normal clothes for starting a normal life. Jason walked out looking thinner, older, but steadier somehow, more grounded. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, son." We hugged, and I felt him shake in my arms. "I didn't think you'd come," Jason said. "Where else would I be?" The drive back to town was quiet at first. Jason stared out the window like he was seeing the world for the first time, taking in trees and sky and freedom. "What now?" he asked finally. "Now you start over. I got you a job interview at the hardware store where I work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest, and they're willing to give you a chance. Dad, and Claire's agreed to let you see Emma every weekend. Supervised at first, but it's a start. She's willing to co-parent if you prove you're serious about being better." Jason was crying now, silently, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve this." "Probably not," I agreed. "But you're getting it anyway. That's what second chances are about." We stopped at a diner for breakfast, and Jason ordered pancakes like he was a kid again, drowning them in syrup and eating like he'd never tasted food before. "Everything okay at the store?" I asked, between bites of eggs. "Yeah, they've been good to me. Benefits, decent pay, good people to work with. It's not what I used to do, but it's better in a lot of ways." "I'll work hard," Jason said. "I'll prove I'm worth the chance." "I know you will." After breakfast, I drove him to a small apartment I'd helped set up. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, furnished with basics from thrift stores and donations. But it was clean and safe, and his. "Welcome home," I said. Jason walked through the apartment slowly, touching walls like he couldn't believe they were real, looking out windows at a world he'd been separated from for 5 years. "Dad?" He turned to face me. "Why did you do this? After everything, why are you helping me?" I thought about that question, about the answer I'd been forming for 5 years. "Because you're my son. Because I remember who you used to be before the money and status corrupted you. And because I believe people can change if they want it badly enough." I paused. "But mostly because I'm your father, and that's what fathers do. We show up. We sacrifice. We love our kids even when they make it hard to love them. I won't let you down again. See that you don't." Emma met her father for the first time in her memory on a Saturday morning at a park Claire chose, neutral territory with plenty of witnesses. She was 8 years old now, cautious and curious, holding tight to her mother's hand. I stood nearby, close enough to be there if Jason needed me, far enough away to give them space. "Emma, this is your dad," Claire said, her voice tight but trying. "Hi," Emma said shyly. "Hi." Jason knelt down to her level. "You've gotten so big. Last time I saw you, you were just a baby. Mom says you were away for work." Jason glanced at Claire, who shook her head slightly. "Not yet. Not today." "I was," Jason said carefully. "But I'm back now, and I'd really like to get to know you, if that's okay." They spent an hour at the park, awkward at first, then slowly warming to each other. Jason pushed Emma on the swings, helped her across the monkey bars, listened to her talk about school and her friends and her favorite cartoons. When it was time to go, Emma hugged him. "Will you come back next week?" she asked. If your mom says it's okay, then yes, every week. Promise? I promise. I drove Jason home afterward, and he was quiet, processing. She's amazing, he said finally. She is. I've missed so much. Her first day of school, her 7th birthday, years of her life. So don't miss any more. Be there from now on. That's all you can do. The hardware store job led to a management position after a year. Jason worked harder than anyone else, showed up early, stayed late, learned everything he could about the business. He was good with customers, patient and helpful, using his business degree in ways he'd never imagined. He rented a bigger apartment after 18 months, one with a 2nd bedroom so Emma could stay over on weekends. Claire had loosened the restrictions, seeing that Jason was serious about rebuilding his life. I helped him paint Emma's room, a light purple she'd picked out herself, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Remember when we painted your room? I asked, rolling primer on the walls. Yeah, I wanted it black, and you said absolutely not. Because you were 12 and would have regretted it in 6 months. You were right. Jason set down his roller. You were right about a lot of things I was too stubborn to see. That's called being young. We all think we know better than our parents until we have kids of our own. I get it now. Why you worked so hard. Why you were always tired. Why you couldn't always be there for school events or games. You were doing your best with what you had. I could have done better. Maybe, but you did enough. More than enough. Jason looked at me. I want to be that kind of father to Emma, the kind who shows up even when it's hard, who sacrifices even when it hurts, who loves unconditionally. Then be that. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. 6 years after Jason's release, on a Tuesday evening in October, we sat together in his apartment having dinner. Emma was at Claire's for the night, and Jason had invited me over for spaghetti, my old recipe that he'd finally learned to make properly. Dad, I need to tell you something, Jason said, setting down his fork. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's really right. He took a breath. I've been seeing someone. Her name is Rebecca. She's a teacher at Emma's school. We met at a parent-teacher conference 6 months ago, and we've been taking it slow, but it's getting serious. That's good news, I said. Why do you look nervous telling me? Because I want you to meet her, and because I want to make sure I'm doing this right. After Claire, after everything that happened, I'm terrified of screwing up again. I set down my own fork and looked at my son. He was 42 years old now, lines around his eyes, gray starting to show at his temples. He looked like a man who'd lived through something hard and come out the other side. Are you with her because she makes you feel important? Or because she makes you feel like yourself? Jason smiled. Because she makes me laugh, because she's kind to Emma, because she knows about my past and doesn't judge me for it. Because when I'm with her, I don't feel like I have to be anyone other than who I am. Then you're doing it right. I love her, Dad. And I think she loves me too. But I'm scared that I'm still that same guy who chose status over family, who threw away everything that mattered for something that didn't. You're not that guy anymore, I said firmly. That guy wouldn't be working at a hardware store. That guy wouldn't be spending every weekend with his daughter. That guy wouldn't be sitting here asking his father for advice. How do you know? Because I've watched you for the past 6 years. I've seen you work hard at a job that doesn't pay much because it's honest. I've seen you show up for Emma even when it's inconvenient. I've seen you make good choices day after day even when easier choices were available. I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. You're not that guy anymore because you chose not to be. Jason's eyes were wet. I want to do right by Rebecca, by Emma, by you. Then introduce me to her. Let's have dinner, all of us. Let me get to know the woman who makes my son happy. Yeah? Yeah. I met Rebecca on a Saturday afternoon at a local restaurant, nothing fancy, just a place with good burgers and reasonable prices. She was 38, with dark, curly hair and an easy smile, wearing jeans and a sweater. Normal. Real. Emma was there too, bouncing in her seat, excited to show me how well she and Rebecca got along. "Grandpa Hank, Rebecca's teaching me how to paint. Real painting, not just kid stuff." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Rebecca extended her hand. "Mr. Taylor, it's so nice to finally meet you. Jason talks about you all the time." "Call me Hank, and I hope he only tells you the good stories." "He tells me the true ones," Rebecca said, and I liked her immediately. We ordered food and talked, and I watched the way Rebecca interacted with Jason and Emma. She was comfortable, natural, treating Emma like a person rather than a child to be managed. And when she looked at Jason, there was affection there, but also respect. She saw him clearly, flaws and all, and cared anyway. "Jason tells me you worked in a factory for 30 years, Rebecca said. 32, actually, until it closed down. That must have been hard, losing your job after that long." "It was, but things have a way of working out. I'm happy at the hardware store. Less stress, better hours, good people." "He's being modest," Jason said. "Dad basically runs the place now. They made him assistant manager last year." "Because I show up and do my job. Nothing special about that." Rebecca smiled. "Jason says you taught him everything important he knows about being a man." I glanced at my son. "I taught him some things. He had to learn the hard lessons himself." "But you were there when he needed you most," Rebecca said quietly. "That counts for everything." After lunch, Emma asked if she could show Rebecca and me the park nearby, and we walked there together, Emma running ahead while the adults followed at a slower pace. "She's good for you," I told Jason. "I know, I don't want to mess this up." "So don't. Be honest with her. Show up for her. Do the work. It's not complicated, son. Relationships fail when people stop trying or start lying. You keep doing both of those things right. You'll be fine." "When did you get so wise?" "Around the time you started listening." Jason and Rebecca got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the same park where Jason had first reconnected with Emma. There were maybe 50 people there, mostly friends and family, nothing extravagant. Rebecca wore a simple white dress, and Jason wore a suit he'd bought off the rack, properly fitted but affordable. Emma was the flower girl, taking her job very seriously, and I was Jason's best man. When it came time for the vows, Jason's voice was steady. "Rebecca, I come to you with a complicated past and an uncertain future. I can't promise you wealth or status or an easy life, but I can promise you honesty. I can promise you that I'll show up every day and do the work. I can promise you that I'll be a good father to Emma and a good partner to you, and I can promise you that I've learned from my mistakes, and I'll spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve." Rebecca was crying, happy tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "Jason, I don't want wealth or status. I just want you. The real you. The one who works hard and loves his daughter and calls his father every Sunday. That's the man I'm choosing. That's the man I love." They kissed, and everyone applauded, and I stood there watching my son marry a good woman who loved him for the right reasons. At the reception, a backyard barbecue at Rebecca's parents' house, Jason pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For showing me what real love looks like. For being my father even when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it. You just forgot for a while. I won't forget again." "Good." We stood there, father and son, watching Emma dance with Rebecca's nieces, watching people celebrate something simple and good and real. "Dad?" Jason's voice was quiet. "What happened to the money? The $50,000 from the wedding? Claire tore up the check, but you'd already cashed out your pension. Where did all that money go?" I'd been waiting for this question for years. "After I turned you in, after the arrests, Margaret Sterling and I used most of it to hire lawyers for the FBI agent's travel expenses and documentation costs. What was left, I put in a trust fund for Emma, for her college, or whatever she needs when she's older. Jason stared at me. You gave it to Emma? It was always meant to be for my family. You weren't ready for it then, but Emma will be when the time comes. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just be a good father. That's payment enough. The years that followed were simple ones. Jason and Rebecca had a son, Michael, 2 years after their wedding. Emma graduated elementary school, then middle school, growing into a smart, confident young woman. I retired from the hardware store at 69 and spent my days fixing things around the neighborhood, helping people with repairs, staying busy. Margaret Sterling passed away quietly in her sleep at 78. We'd remained friends until the end, 2 people bound together by the hard choices we'd made. She left me a letter thanking me for giving her the courage to leave her husband, to rebuild her life on her own terms. Richard Sterling died in prison serving his sentence. I felt nothing when I heard the news. Not satisfaction, not anger, just a distant acknowledgement that some stories end exactly as they should. Jason visited me every Sunday, sometimes with the whole family, sometimes just the 2 of us. We'd sit on my small porch, drinking coffee, talking about nothing important. His hardware store promoted him to general manager. Rebecca made tenure at her school. Emma got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, the trust fund I'd set up covering the rest. She wants to study business, Jason told me one Sunday. Says she wants to learn how to do things right, how to build something legitimate and good. Smart girl. Gets it from you. Gets it from all of us, you, me, Rebecca. She's been watching and learning. I hope so. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good, real, built on foundation of honesty and work and showing up. On a Tuesday morning in March, 14 years after Jason's release from prison, I had a heart attack. It was sudden, painful, overwhelming. I collapsed in my kitchen, unable to reach the phone, unable to call for help. My neighbor found me 3 hours later when she came by to borrow sugar and saw me through the window. I woke up in the hospital with Jason holding my hand. Dad, can you hear me? I can hear you, I said, my voice weak. What happened? You had a heart attack, a bad one. They had to do surgery. You've been out for 2 days. I looked around the hospital room. Rebecca was there, and Emma and little Michael. Bobby had flown in from Florida. They all looked worried. I'm okay, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. The doctor came in later and gave me the news. Extensive damage. I'd need to take it easy, avoid stress, take medication for the rest of my life. Which, he said carefully, might not be as long as I'd hoped. How long? I asked. Hard to say. Could be years, could be months. Depends on a lot of factors. Ballpark. 2 years, maybe 3 if you're careful. I nodded. Not as long as I'd wanted, but longer than some people got. Jason stayed with me for the next week, sleeping in the hospital chair, helping me walk the halls, being there every moment. You don't have to do this, I told him. Yes, I do. You were there for me when I needed you most. Now I'm here for you. I'm proud of you, I said. In case I haven't said that enough. I'm so damn proud of the man you've become. Because of you? No, because of you. I gave you tools, but you did the work. They released me from the hospital after 10 days with a list of restrictions and instructions. Jason moved me into his and Rebecca's house, setting up the guest room on the first floor so I wouldn't have to deal with stairs. This is too much, I protested. It's not enough, Jason said firmly. You're staying here where we can look after you. No arguments. So I became part of their daily life. Breakfast with the family every morning. Sitting with Michael while he did his homework. Watching Emma practice her presentations for business school. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that make up a life. Rebecca brought me tea in the afternoons and sat with me while I drank it. Thank you for giving me back my husband, she said one day. I didn't give you anything. Jason found his own way back. Because you showed him the way. Because you loved him enough to let him face consequences. Because you didn't give up. She paused. I never had a father growing up. Mine left when I was 3. But watching you and Jason, seeing what a real father does, it's been one of the greatest gifts of my life. I'm just a guy who worked in a factory. You're a man who saved his son. Don't diminish that. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. My health was stable but fragile. I tired easily, needed naps, couldn't do the physical work I used to do. But I was there, present, watching my family live their lives. Emma came home for Thanksgiving, bringing a boyfriend named David, who was nervous and polite and clearly smitten with her. We talked over dinner about his plans, his studies, his intentions. What do you do, sir? David asked me. I used to work in a factory, then a hardware store. Now mostly I sit around and let my son take care of me. Grandpa's being modest, Emma said. He's a legend. Ask anyone in this family. A legend? David looked confused. Grandpa taught Dad everything important. How to be honest, how to work hard, how to love your family even when it's hard. Right, Dad? Jason smiled. Right. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jason and I sat in the living room, the house quiet around us. I've been thinking, Jason said, about the wedding, about what happened that day. Ancient history. No, let me say this. He turned to face me. When I stood up there and called Richard Sterling my father, when I hugged him in front of you, that was the worst moment of my life. Worse than getting arrested, worse than going to prison, worse than anything. Because I hurt you, deliberately, publicly, and I did it to make myself feel important. I know. But what you did afterward, turning me in, forcing me to face consequences, that was the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. You saved my life, Dad. If you hadn't stopped me, I'd have ended up like Richard. I was angry. You were a father, and that's what fathers do when their kids are destroying themselves. They intervene, even when it hurts, even when it costs them everything. It cost me that $50,000, that's true. Jason laughed. It cost you more than money. It cost you peace of mind. It cost you easy relationship with your son. It cost you years of knowing whether you did the right thing. But it was worth it, I said. Look at you now. Look at your family, your life, your choices. It was all worth it. I hope so. I know so. Winter came, and with it, my health declined. The doctors adjusted my medications, but my heart was tired, worn out from years of hard work and stress. I slept more, ate less, spent my days in a recliner by the window, watching snow fall and birds come to the feeder Emma had hung for me. Jason took time off work to be with me. We watched old movies together, played cards when I had the energy, talked about memories. Remember when I was 10 and I wanted to learn to fix cars? Jason asked one afternoon. You wanted to take apart the lawnmower to see how it worked. And you let me. And you couldn't get it back together. But you helped me figure it out. Took us 3 weekends, but we did it. Jason smiled at the memory. You were patient with me, even when I was frustrated and ready to give up. That's what teaching is. Letting people struggle until they learn, being there to help when they need it. I try to be that way with Michael and Emma, patient, present, like you were with me. You're doing a good job. Because I had a good example. We sat in comfortable silence, the TV playing something neither of us was watching. Dad? Jason's voice was quiet. Are you afraid? Sometimes. But mostly I'm grateful. For what? For this. For getting to see you become the man you are. For knowing Emma and Michael. For Rebecca. For second chances and simple moments and knowing that my life mattered. Your life mattered more than you know. I know enough. On a Sunday morning in February, I woke up knowing it was time. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. I called for Jason, and he came running, Rebecca right behind him. "Dad?" "Call the family," I said. "I want everyone here." They came quickly. Emma drove home from college. Bobby flew in from Florida, his wife beside him. The house filled with people I loved, all gathered around my bed in the guest room. "I need to say something," I told them, my voice weak but clear. "Jason, come here." My son knelt beside the bed, holding my hand. "You made mistakes," I said. "Big ones. You hurt people, including me. But you faced those mistakes. You did your time. You changed your life. You became someone I'm proud to call my son. That takes more courage than never failing in the first place. Dad, let me finish. I need you to know this. Everything I did, every choice I made, it was all worth it to see you standing here now. A good man, a good husband, a good father. That's my legacy. Not the factory work or the hardware store or anything else. You're my legacy. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. More than you'll ever know." I looked around the room at all the faces watching me. Emma, crying quietly. Rebecca, holding Michael. Bobby, my oldest friend. The family I'd built through work and sacrifice and showing up day after day. "Thank you," I said to all of them, "for making my life mean something." Emma came forward and kissed my forehead. "You taught me to be strong, Grandpa. To work hard and choose what's right even when it's hard." "You already knew that," I said. "You just needed to see someone do it." Michael climbed up on the bed beside me, small and serious. "Are you going to heaven, Grandpa Hank?" "I don't know. But wherever I'm going there knowing I did my best." "Will you watch over us?" "Every single day." The room was full of love and grief and gratitude, all mixed together in that way life gets when something important is ending. I looked at Jason one last time. "You did good, son. You did real good. Because of you. No, because of you." My breathing was getting harder. The room was starting to fade, but I wasn't afraid. I'd done what I came here to do. I'd raised a son, taught him right from wrong, loved him through his worst mistakes, and watched him become someone worth being proud of. That was enough. More than enough. Jason was still holding my hand when everything went quiet. Epilogue. Jason Taylor stood at his father's grave 3 months later, Emma beside him, Rebecca holding Michael. The headstone was simple, just his father's name and dates and a single line. He showed up. "You okay, Dad?" Emma asked. Yeah, I am." Jason looked down at the fresh grass growing over the burial plot. He would have hated a big funeral. So we gave him a small one. Just family and friends, people who actually knew him. He would have liked that. They stood there for a few minutes, none of them speaking, just being present. "I got the letter from the trust fund administrator," Emma said finally. "The money Grandpa set aside for me. There's almost $70,000 in there. From his wedding gift, plus interest. He wanted you to have it. I know, and I'm going to use it for college like he wanted. But I'm also going to set aside some of it for Michael for when he's older. Pass it forward the way Grandpa would have wanted." Jason smiled. He'd like that. They walked back to the car together, a family built on second chances and hard lessons and showing up when it mattered. Jason drove past the old factory where his father had worked for 32 years. It was abandoned now, windows broken, parking lot cracked and overgrown. But Jason could see it the way it used to be, full of workers like his father, men and women who showed up every day and did honest work for honest pay. He thought about the wedding, about the $50,000 torn to pieces on the floor, about calling another man father. He thought about prison, about consequence, about learning the hard way what actually mattered. And he thought about his father, at peace with the life he'd lived. "Thank you," Jason whispered to the empty air, "for everything." That night at home, Jason sat down with Rebecca. "I want to start a scholarship," he said. In my father's name. For kids from working-class families who want to go to college, kids like Emma, kids who need someone to believe in them. That's a beautiful idea. The Henry Taylor Scholarship. For students who show up, work hard, and choose what's right, even when it costs them something. Your father would love that. I know. Jason pulled out his phone and called the bursar's office at the state university. Started the process, made the first donation, began building something good from the lessons he'd learned. Because that's what his father had taught him. You show up, you do the work, you love people even when they make it hard, and you pass it forward. Always pass it forward. Jason Taylor had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. But he'd learned it. And now he was going to spend the rest of his life teaching it to others. Just like his father had taught it to him, the way fathers do.